Again, this is not going to be a list of tips and tricks on things like how to run a great home office or work from home. We're going to see that maybe there's something a little bit deeper. We've been doing this for a little while now as a world. We've seen it in our training classes, in the coaching that I'm doing. This shift from when the world was suddenly remote and all of a sudden we were working from home. People were learning the tools. Saw a lot of content on here's how you have a good Zoom meeting and things like that. That's not what this is going to be, because quite frankly, there's a lot of great content out there on that. What we want to do is talk about the human and the machine, the differences behind what makes companies that are able to build great teams and great products and survive in the world that we're in. So that's our goal of what we're trying to get. Again, the title, Scrum in the New Normal. I'm going to go back and forth between PowerPoint. This is not going to be very PowerPoint heavy. Following up to this, we are going to put both recordings. This is being streamed live on Facebook. We're going to record it, put it out there on demand. But then a series of content and kind of guides and things. And the idea is we're still learning about this and what it means to work in the world that we're in. And we're going to talk about what we think we've learned and the things that we don't have a clue on. So for those that haven't had the opportunity to meet me, my name is Chris. I've worked more than 14 years of Agile and Scrum experience leading large projects ranging anywhere from the small startup that started in a dining room in Montgomery, Alabama, all the way up to the C-suite of some of the world's largest manufacturing companies. And in that, lots of experience, both public sector, private sector. There's one thing that we've learned to become very passionate about and that drives a lot of this. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, one of the Agile manifesto core principles. We are building systems for humans by humans. Regardless of what you're building, at some point there is a person. And so that consistency, how do we deal with that, is a lot of where my coaching and experience focuses and what we do at Sagai Studios. In that process, I've become one of the world's first licensed Scrum trainers. That's through Scrum Inc., a company created by the co-founder of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland. It's been an honor since roughly late January, early February. I've had over 250 public and private students. Many of you that might be attending have sat through some of my classes, either now, recently, or even in the past. And it's really cool to get the opportunity to help make lives better. If you scan that QR code, that's my LinkedIn. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, let's please change that. I want to be connected with the community at large. So I'm a licensed Scrum trainer, a Scrum at Scale practitioner and trainer, CEO of Sagai Studios, and the chief product owner, guiding kind of our company. And we'll talk about some of the experience in those roles. But let's actually look at our backlog for today. The first thing I want to talk about, we all hear we're working from home. We've heard the term suddenly remote. And yes, that's true, but there's a little bit of fallacy there. And we're going to talk about where we feel things might not be quite as straightforward as we're working from home. Next, we've learned a lot about what building great teams looks like and what the kinds of things you need to think about that. So we're going to talk about some of the experiences that we're seeing, again, both hands-on in leading a company and the coaching I've done, but even throughout the world when I talk to other experts and companies, leaders that are doing this. What are we learning about great teams? What are we learning about great products? This is so vital now in the world that we're living in the crisis and in the pressure that's happening. How do we build great products? Finally, Q&A and next steps. Please play around. Make sure play around with the Q&A functions. Please make sure that you know how to use that, what that tool looks like, so that we have good questions and answers at the end of this. And even throughout, if there's something that pops up, Josh, TJ, and Joy will help make sure I'm aware of that. And just so that I have it, I'm going to make sure that my chat window is open as well. And so that's the goal of what we're trying to accomplish today. We're going to go roughly 20 to 30 minutes worth of content, and then lots of time for Q&A before we wrap the day. So here's the first thing, and this is the most important thing. The concept of we're working from home. When we started this, we had lots of content, lots of training around what does it mean from working from home. You've looked and we heard from people that had been experts, that have been working from home for long periods of time. But the reality is we are not working from home. We are working during a crisis. So much has changed about the world over the last months. And yes, we are working from remote. Companies that never thought they would ever have a remote presence all of a sudden find themselves pushing their teams out and trying to prepare the team. Sagayo ran into that. We were, while comfortable working with remote, and had members of our team that would do it and would coach and train in it. For the majority, by design, Sagayo was designed to be a co-located teams on site, working together, collaborating, and all of a sudden we couldn't do that. And so then we reach out, let's figure out, so we can learn. There's lots of knowledge on how to do this. So we go and we reach out to that. But the reality is, and what I've seen in the coaching and the one-on-one sessions that I'm having in the group sessions is that while a lot of good has come from it, there's also a lot of bad that has happened. The difference in working from home and working during a crisis is we're in a situation where often people feel the world is falling down around us. And the real human emotional aspects that have been going on, we often, it's so easy as a company to overlook that. When you're leading people, we lead them to be great employees, to be great developers, to be great Scrum Masters, to build great products. And far too often we forget that first thing in the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We're dealing with humans. And we're people that all of a sudden, not only can we not go into our office, can we, our how we get work done has been changed. And even if we're used to working from home, everything else around us has changed. We can't go to the grocery store. We can't go out and spend time with our family. And the change that has happened there, far too often we have overlooked. And I've seen the very real burnout, anxiety, stress, depression that's happening among so many of my coaching clients, team, and even myself. And I think a lot of it gets to the point of we're not working from home. We're working in a crisis. So the things that we're learning about how we do this stuff doesn't necessarily translate to a company that wants to go remote or stay remote when we're able to return to the office. And so really thinking through what that means. And so there's a question from an attendee: what about mental health when the company just wants to do business as usual? And I'm going to take a little bit of shot at this. I think we're going, so what if the company doesn't understand? They want to just pretend that nothing has changed about the world. And so what I hope comes out of this, and the push that I hope we can say, is that if you lead people, you cannot assume that business as usual. It's critical to know that business will never be usual again. And we're going to learn to see what that looks like in a little bit. So hopefully I unpack that a little bit more in a little bit. Let me know and hold me accountable to making sure we get that question answered. So we talk about, again, we're working in crisis. And yes, some of the skills and techniques are helpful from working from home, but there's more to it. So what are the things that we're seeing that great companies are doing to make a difference? So what have we learned about people that are building great teams? And there's a few key ideas. And the first is one I've hit and I've stressed a couple times. First and foremost, we are human. The people on your teams are dealing with very real issues. And the reality of kind of what we've been dealing with is not as much, I survived, I was in Tuscaloosa during the tornadoes several years ago. There was a very real direct, visible change that happened, and there was easy things to go do. If we wanted to go, clean up neighborhoods, cut trees down, do the kinds of things, we had action. This has been a much longer crisis with very little actual action that many people can go do. And so the human psychology behind that, the depression, the anxiety, the things that you just can't control, have had real impact on the people I've worked with. I've seen sustainability take nosedives. And it's interesting because often I see actual productivity, amount of work done in the day typically has increased. And this is where I say we're not working from home, we're working in crisis, where I think, based on the conversations that I've had, what's happening here. We did a really good job of teaching people how to work remote. Go set up your space, make sure your family is not distracting you, make sure all of these things are in place to have a great and how to be super productive when working remote. We did a good job at that. But the reality is we did a good job at that. We didn't acknowledge all the other things that at the end of the day, you can't go out to eat. There's concern over how long is this going to last, all these things. So in everything that we do, if you want to build a great team, those that are doing, that I've seen do a great job at this, understand that everyone on your team is a human first. And so leaders are taking time out of their day, not to check in and see how someone's doing at their work, not to check in and have just a small talk conversation, but genuinely checking in on their people. How are you doing? What are your fears? To be good at this, leaders that are great at this are modeling it first. Brene Brown has her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. If you haven't seen that, go watch it. Range through here. When leaders are vulnerable and we share what we're dealing with and we show that vulnerability to our teams, we help our teams understand that we are, that when we're vulnerable, it's going to allow them to be more vulnerable. And when you have that shared experience, that shared conversation about what's going on, we get to address things as from a human standpoint. So Kristen asks, the line between work and rest has been blurred. My team's productivity is going up from this. Absolutely. We have absolutely seen people getting more work done during the day because we sit down, we get on our computer at 8 o'clock and we work till 5, sometimes even later. It's not sustainable and it's contributing to burnout. What have we learned about this in my role? And this is such a great segue. So first of all, we're human. That means we're going to get it wrong. That means great teams are addressing and talking to their teams as people. Often we're continuing this concept of the 8-hour workday that the business world has created. The reality is that will kill you when you do it virtually. And here's what I mean by that. If you go to PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge, and PMI, and you're looking at what they say the regular person gets done during the day, when you look at an 8-hour day, you typically plan about 6 hours of actual work getting done. Because what happens when you go into the office, or so at least some of your team are in the office, they are distracted. You are having, the stupid water cooler conversations, or you're arguing over different things. To get to a meeting, typically you stand up, you walk, you move, you get around. We do not expect, even when you're looking at something as rigid as a defined process, you don't expect people to work 8 hours a day. And managers often say, well, yeah, I expect, they're come in, we're going to get more work done, and that's great. But what has happened is that people are working 8 hours a day, and we're sitting on Zoom. We get in the morning, We do an hour-long meeting, we go to our next hour-long meeting, we go to our next hour-long meeting, and before we know it, we spent 8 hours in front of the computer or longer, because we've done a good job of separating our family and not doing the distractions, all the things we're telling, except we're not meant to do that as humans. To be on all day like that is more than we were really intended to be on. So something that we've seen great teams do is to plan 6-hour days. And that doesn't mean that you come in 2 hours late or early. Sometimes we need to be there when our teams are available, but actually making sure that on your schedule, on your calendar, that you put 2 hours in the middle of a typical day where you don't check your email. You literally get up, go to a different room, turn the TV on, go on a walk, play with your dog, whatever it takes. You physically get up, move, get away from it. And you as leaders and as Scrum Masters, I encourage your team to do that. So I've been on a team that's done it myself. And I've coached that now through about 15 different teams, and seeing the increase in sustainability is going up. What's happening is we are working more during the day and we're getting more done, but that sustainability is critical that we're checking that. So don't try to force yourself to have an 8-hour workday. Understand that we need to do something different and let your teams be okay with that culturally. And yes, that means leaders, sometimes we need to be very conscientious of setting the example for that. Scrum Masters, checking in on your teams, making sure they're doing that. Culturally, we have to get rid of the concept of the 8-hour workday if we're going to look at long-term doing things remote like this. So the 8-hour workday, it's going to kill you from a virtual setting. It's far too easy to stay always on, which is not what we want to do. Next, connect as humans, but use good sense. So one of the first things we did as a team at Sagayo is when we went remote, we created an open Zoom room that everyone was logging in during the day because we wanted to make that connection. We wanted to reduce the friction in being able to connect to each other. If you have to send an email or pick up the phone and call, that slows down the process. It slows down innovation. And it slows down the camaraderie and the benefit that you get from a co-located team. So an open Zoom room that our team is always in, their camera on, seems to have really helped in that situation. Zoom is really good. We always talk about have your cameras on. If you take a class with us, we require that your cameras are on. There does seem to be a real difference that I'm seeing though. If your team is either younger or very focused on the kind of work they're doing is more heads down development, the collaboration is less about, it's more about the work that's getting done, less about the interaction, then that seems to be pretty sustainable and healthy and able to, again, reduce friction in communicating. But there is a difference, and many of you have likely heard the term Zoom burnout. And where I see that's really set in would be people like our Scrum Masters, our product owners, me as a coach. And at the end of the day, we spend all day in Zoom meetings, cameras are on. We're so much more exhausted than we would ever be had we done the same amount of meetings in person. And it seems, while I haven't seen any definitive evidence to this, what it seems to be a big difference lies in what is the goal you're trying to get out of the meeting. If you are a Scrum Master or a product owner, a coach, someone that is looking at the reading between the communication or the human experience is more what we're going for, you're spending more effort trying to read the cues, read between the lines, because what's happening is when we talk face to face in person, our brain picks up on more cues. We can see more body expressions. We read through things. It's easier. Our brain can actually be a little bit lazy because it takes a lot of shortcuts in understanding and reading emotion. You don't get some of the same shortcuts when you're doing it virtually. Much less if you do it over the phone, but even when you do video, you lose a lot of those cues. So it's like our brain is on overdrive and we're processing this new way. And so if you're dealing with human emotion and you're trying to connect with humans, and that's your job, scrum masters, product owners, managers, leaders, understand that the more time in the day you spend on Zoom, the higher we see burnout and lower sustainability. So one thing that we've done is limit, we see this in schools, I've done it myself, limit the amount of time we're allowed to spend on Zoom to 4 or 5 hours a day if your job is specifically dealing with human emotions. So connect, but use good sense. Understand that, you know, if you're feeling burned out, something has to change, and be sure that you change and make that difference. And the way you're going to understand, and the only way we've learned in what we did is again, there's not a lot of real research on how you do the kind of work we do in a global pandemic, because the last global pandemic was in 1918 and no one was using Zoom then. So what we've had to do in the community, in the coaching and training and leadership communities, to experiment. Try different things. So when I say, hey, don't spend more than 4 or 5 hours a day, I can't point you to a scientific study that says go do that. What I can point you to is evidence and empirical evidence with teams that have done this, that have seen both their productivity increase and their sustainability increase over time. So don't be afraid to try things. Try some of the things we're doing, but even more, this is really new world. It's not changing anytime soon. So try things, but be very purposeful in it. Be transparent with each other. Understand where your experiment's going to go. Try something that takes a short period of time to get that short feedback loop that we talk about in Scrum. Inspect, adapt, and keep doing. This isn't only true for your product, it's true for how you lead teams. So the experimental idea, this is something that Scrum Masters, when you're in your retrospective for teams that do Scrum, this is something you want to talk about and bring up. The happiness metric, sustainability, be sure that you're tracking that and that you're trying to do things to get better at it. A lot of teams have been remote in the past, non-co-located. We have this concept that we talk about. This is a Scrum pattern for those that might have been through the licensed Scrum training. One of the Scrum patterns is this idea about quantum entanglement. And all quantum entanglement is, or if you have people that are working remote and you want to help them work together and be on the same team. Again, not people that are forced, but think before January. What you would do as a company is you would bring those people together. You'd allow them to work together physically in the same space. Let them go and take time, hanging out together. You build that personal connection. And when they have that common basis and you separate them, they're able to work better together than teams that have never been brought together in the first place. And so this idea of quantum entanglement, you bring two teams together or people together that aren't co-located. When they go, they think alike. They have that common framework. Well, we can't actually do that in the current world, meaning you can't bring people physically together. There are companies that are shutting down and aren't planning on doing this anytime this year, and some companies are considering never doing it again. The reality is you still need that connection. Teams that work remote and aren't co-located are not as effective. Think of all the problems I just talked about the complexity of dealing with remote tools, things like that. You have to invest in building that common framework. And that's what the quantum entanglement Scrum pattern does. So the things that we've seen that have worked there would be leverage modern gaming and other kinds of tools to build connection virtually. So such as, can you actually set game nights on a regular basis with your team where you get in the tool, you're not allowed to talk about work, you just interact, playing a game using the framework. Something else that's a pretty cool thing is you take a virtual tour of someone's house, of someone's neighborhood, where you get the camera or a laptop and you literally show out the window. This is really cool when you're doing it with teams that aren't even in the same country, because I've seen, the streets of India and Brazil in the same day, and that's something that when it's someone showing and pointing out things, it makes a connection. So that quantum entanglement is still something we want to try to do. We just have to be creative around doing it virtually. And then back to that experimenting and inspecting and adapting um, is something we want to do. So I've got a couple questions that come in. So let's look at that before we move to the next point. Are there case studies about remote team exercises to build connections? As far as specific case studies, I've seen some come out from Mural, companies that are creating kind of the collaborative platform. Mural.co is a virtual whiteboard tool. I've not seen specific scientific studies, and that's definitely something we're always on the lookout for. One of the best case studies, though, if you go to scrumplop, scrumplop.org, go to the patterns and look up the quantum entanglement pattern. It talks about the importance and some of the things that you do. Then we have to be creative around how do we get the same kinds of techniques and do it virtually. And we'll make sure that those links are all available in the follow-up email. How do you balance safety and being in the same location as companies move back to in-person? Heidi, I'm going to save that to the Q&A time because I want to move forward with this. But we'll keep it in the window so we make sure that we get it answered. So experimenting, doing quantum entanglement, working for there, again, trying different things and understanding that you have to actively work on addressing your team's sustainability and burnout, and not just on how productive they are. So make sure leaders, scrum masters, people that are on teams, that you are patient with each other and looking into that. But what are we looking about great products? This is something that's been very near as a small business owner, and with all the stories we see right and left of companies shutting down, and not small companies, huge companies shutting down during this time. It can be very stressful and anxiety inducing to kind of understand that there's a very real, the reality is not every company has survived or will survive this. But this isn't new. So this is a chart that comes out of our, comes from some research on the average lifespan of how long a company lasts on the S&P 500 index. So even before 2020, so if you go back to 1965, so the top 500 companies in the stock market, up to 1980 or so, they were spending decades on there, so that they had gotten on the S&P 500, and for multiple decades, the average company was staying on this list. But what's happened is companies have gotten, and competition has gotten so much more fierce, and that staying in that top place, given all of the people fighting for that king of the hill, top of the list approach, it's tough. So in 2020, even before the pandemic, those numbers had decreased by less than half and trending down. Now trending significantly downwards. Who would have ever thought 6 months ago that there would be rumors of American Airlines having bankruptcy, going bankrupt? Who would have ever thought that Zoom would have been one of the next top companies on the face of the planet and had the who would ever thought that my mom would be using Zoom on a regular basis? Society's changed. And it's never going back to the way it was. Things are never going to be the same tomorrow as they are today. The world is constantly changing. And there's lots of things that are going on. So companies have to understand how to survive in this. And if you are not ready to understand how to do that, you really are going to struggle to survive. You can't do the things the way they've always done. So here are some things that I've seen in the product owners I'm working at and in the companies and even in Sigayo that has helped us not only sustain customers saying, holding off, pushing off, all those kinds of things. We're actually at a point where we're healthier, in a healthier financial position, honestly, than we have been. And it's because of some of these things that we've learned. And the first is pivot or die. You could also talk about, for those that have been in training or heard about Colonel John Boyd. Colonel John Boyd talks about this thing called the OODA loop. OODA is observe, orient, decide, act. And he was a fighter pilot, and he was talking about, how do you survive a dogfight? Observe, orient, decide, act. So those that can do that loop faster than their opponents are going to be more likely to survive. Observe the field, understand what's happening about it, orient yourself to it. What's different? So where are your opponents? Where are the clouds? Where's the mountains? Where are all the things that are going to impact you? Orient yourself to where you are. Make a decision on where you want to go and act. If you can do that faster, then that's how you survive. And an opponent, yes, it could be competitor, but it could be the environment. It could be all that's changing around us and how fast things are changing around us. So observe, orient, decide, act. Get faster at making decisions. If we know that it takes a lot of bad ideas to have a good idea, and a lot of good ideas to have that one great idea, that one unicorn, you have to be faster than anyone than the environment, than your competitors. And the way you do that is working with great product owners that are trying different things, understanding that you can't stay the same, and being okay with not staying the same. You've got to be okay with change. And so that pivot or die, be willing to make the decision. The restaurants that were able to get really good at curbside delivery, and how fast, it blew my mind how fast you could get a margarita in Birmingham following the pandemic. That blew my mind. It was like the next day you could drive up to El Barrio and get, takeout margaritas. If you could make faster decisions and move faster. So an example with Sagaya, we had just started our training, really getting some ground in our training. And then all of a sudden training in Scrum training is typically very interactive and all face-to-face. Then all of a sudden we found out that we could no longer meet. And it was actually literally 1 week before a huge class. It had revenue that we needed. It was going to leverage and fund a lot of kind of what we're doing today. But we weren't going to be able to have it. And so thankfully we had a phenomenal team. And within a week of saying, no, we can't be in person, with a lot of patience from our team, from our students, we were able to pivot and move all of the content virtual. And some of you in here or watching after the fact were in that class. It wasn't perfect. We did a lot of things bad, but we made a fast pivot. We tried. And again, our success of where Sagayo is today relative to, quite frankly, where we could have been or even should have been, is because of that ability and that willingness of a team to say, the world has changed, we're going to move forward and respond to it. And you do that through empowered, great, and wonderful product owners that are able to make that shift. So pivot or die. Crisis leads to opportunity. Virtual training for us at one point was a way to back up and not, and be able to do training. But originally we were thinking this is temporary. But the reality is, over the last several classes, we're actually getting pretty good at it. We see companies that are figuring out, all right, so what are the opportunities here? It didn't take very long before I saw designer face masks start popping up in my Facebook feed. We wanted stylish ways to wear a face mask. That wasn't a business opportunity 6 months ago. So looking at your business, where you are and what are the opportunities here, and the way you get good at that is you have to understand your why. Sagayo exists to help make everyone we interact with better. So our metric, our number one metric for success, are lives that we point to that are better off, whether it be our employees, our customers, or the world at large. So if that's our metric, then when crisis happens, we can use that core why to understand what else we need to pivot into. Where are some things we can go try? And we don't have to do out of fear. We can do boldly into that area, and we could try things. Uh, and so use this as an opportunity. What are we learning about the world? Uh, and honestly, we're seeing in many ways, there's a lot of capabilities, back to the virtual training, there's a lot of things that a virtual platform brings that we can't do in person. For instance, we were told, we've had a couple say that, I'm handicapped. I couldn't come to a physical training because I couldn't physically get there, but I can sit and I know I can do the things, but this training gave me an opportunity. So we're actually able to open up doors for people that normally wouldn't have been there. So find the opportunity and do that by understanding your why. Next, don't boil the ocean. That first shift to, let's say you're a restaurant, you're making that first shift to drive-through curbside pickup. What's the smallest thing you can do, the quickest thing you can do to be able to experiment? Are people going to follow through with this and actually get something out that delivers value and delivers knowledge? This is kind of core product owner thinking and training here. Again, back to us as an example, that first virtual class, what was the smallest thing we could do? It was a big shift. I knew I couldn't put together a fancy learning management system. I couldn't put together all sorts of interactive activities or virtual games. I mean, what was the smallest thing we do to one? Is it feasible? Can we actually do it? Is it desirable? Do people actually want it? And is it viable? Can we actually make money for it? So when you're looking at the pivot, don't try to come up with the big world-changing solutions your first thing out, because it's going to take too long and everyone's going to pass you by. That OODA loop is all about fast. What's the smallest decision you can make that moves you forward in that? And so when you look at that, based on your why, when you're looking at the areas you're going to pivot as a company and how you're going to survive in an always changing world, and how are you going to stay ahead of your competition. And competition isn't always companies, it could be the environment, all sorts of things. How can you learn and how are you going to know that you did it right? Next, so we talk about don't boil the ocean, find the smallest thing, do it, and then get better at it next time. And all of this, so I keep talking, and you've heard me use the term Scrum Master or Product Owner. I've purposely been trying not to say or tie this directly to Scrum yet, because honestly, everything that we've learned here is not incumbent on companies that are just doing Scrum by any stretch of the imagination. There is so much more. There are other ways to do it. Scrum, however, is really optimized for the world we're in. I mean, you've got someone on the team that's looking at how to get better. You have short iterations, and you're always looking at that improvement. So Scrum really does make a big impact here. We have empowered teams. That fast decision making doesn't exist unless if you have to go up through a big hierarchy. How much can you empower the people that are doing the work to make the decisions and what's going to deliver value? So Scrum is all about building empowered teams and gives you that framework. So if you're doing it, and even if you're not doing Scrum, find ways to empower the people that are actually doing the work. They're the ones who are going to have the input. They're listening to your customers. They're the ones that boots are on the ground. Empower them to do that. Scrum helps you do that. Scrum is based on empiricism. Empiricism is the scientific method. It doesn't make assumptions. It uses hypotheses and tests and has evidence that pulls back that you learn from and make your next test. So for instance, the empiricism around sustainability, we had a hypothesis that spending 8 hours a day is too much time for a team and that we needed to try something different. So we knew sustainability and productivity were the two metrics we were looking at. When we reduced, we did an experiment for a sprint. What we saw is our sustainability went up when we were only spending 6 hours a day. And surprisingly, our velocity went up. We actually were even more productive during those 6 hours because we were more rested and our brain was in a good place. So Scrum is empirical. It's going to give you lots of opportunities to try different things and look at it. Finally, Scrum is focused on always getting better. And this is where I want to leave before I leave the point. So Scrum helps you always get better. I argue it's the number one reason Scrum has been successful. And this is the number one philosophy that I think you need to pull away. Regardless of crisis, whether we're working in a pandemic or we're working in social unrest, whatever your thing is, or we're just going to work on a regular day, regardless of this, if you are not better today than you were yesterday and tomorrow than you are today, you're going to fall behind. This isn't meaning flog yourself, beat yourself. Remember, you're human, and we focus on the human and the machine here. But we can always get better. That path to enlightenment, that path to Kaizen inside the Scrum world. Kaizen is just a path to always getting better. And the thing is, you're always on it. And you never necessarily arrive. You can always get better. And talking with Jeff Sutherland, absolutely one of the foremost thinkers on how companies get work done and get well. He's been doing this for his lifetime. He will very clearly tell you that he's always getting better. The Scrum Guide, kind of the foundation, is constantly changing because even if you've been doing this for decades, you can always get better. So those are the things that we've seen, that I've coached, that we've learned, that have made a difference. There's a lot more there. I do want to take time to open up, and I've got a couple questions and comment, but go ahead. Let's go into some Q&A time and see what we can learn from each other. So I'll start by answering Heidi's question, and then we'll move through, but please throw some other questions out there. So the first one, how do you balance safety and being in the same location as companies move back to in-person? So Sagayo, our lease ended during the middle of all this. We moved out of our building. Our job, if we want to make people better, getting people sick is not the way we do that. That said, there's also more to it. Having a stable place to work, sometimes getting out of the house, there's a real cabin fever going on. So while we haven't moved into large offices, we did create a small space that we have very limited use as an opportunity or as a benefit for our people to get out of their place. I firmly believe that one, you should not force anyone back into a situation they do not feel comfortable with. And as a company, that's a firm stance we make. But you should also understand that there are people that have different psychological needs. And if you care about your team, you need to offer those options there. I'm not an expert on how to keep people safe from a medical standpoint. What I recommend any company is to seek those that are. Ignore politics, ignore your best friend, armchair epidemiologist. Go to the CDC, Small Business Administration, go to the people that are actually scientists and figure out what they say is the best way to move back. We're learning that we can build great teams and you don't have to be in the same situation. That said, we also know that your brain, you can be a little bit lazier. Your brain can be a little bit, not have to be as active if you are in person. And sometimes that makes creativity easier. So I definitely see a push. And even Sagayo, we're looking, and we will be offering that space. We're going to be a lot more flexible with how we do it on that. Kristen, and Kristen, for those that aren't familiar, she was one of our first clients at Sagayo. She works with Easter Seals in Houston, Texas. It's all about helping people. And I love the point about virtual as an opportunity for some that have been excluded from traditional work. And I love that. I encourage every companies, yes, we exist to make money, but when you're making money, find ways to impact the world. And making more opportunities and level playing field is absolutely what we do. Michael, and I saw Dustin's hand raised. So Michael asks, is there a specific study or case evidence of how Scrum addresses bias in the development of products, services, and solutions? Specific case study, I'm not aware of one, and I'm not particularly sure what you mean bias. So if you could unpack that a little bit, either in chat, and that'll help me maybe get a little better answer to your question. And other case studies, so there are some great case studies out there. We published some. I don't know if they're specifically what you're talking about. One that I would point you to and will is scrumplop.org. And what that is Scrum Pattern languages of practice. So it's a bunch of patterns from people that have done Scrum. It's things that go beyond the Scrum guide. And so there are things such as how do you identify the next best thing to go work on. And the other part, as far as taking bias away, great product owners. So good product owners help you figure out what you need to go build. Great product owners understand that everything they think is an assumption until someone gives you money and says it solved their problem. You are always about solving problems. Everything we do is problem solving. If you're not solving problems, then it's work you probably should be doing. And understanding who's filling the problem is part of it. The bias or the assumption that we know what's right for someone is kind of inherent. Scrum says shorten that, acknowledge that it's a guess, and very quickly iterate and test on it. And so I think that gets maybe near. If that didn't, please reach out. I'd love to answer specifically on your question. So other questions in the last, I could take 2 more. All right, so we got a little more, but I do want to kind of wrap a little bit. If you have additional questions, we've got a few more minutes to get them answered. Let me pull up this. So I've talked a lot about our virtual training, and I do need to hit a little bit. I don't want to spend a lot of time in a commercial, but I want to give a little bit of a commercial and talk about just one of the coolest things. Our training classes have been mind-blowing in what it's meant for me as a trainer, as far as getting a huge variety and diversity of thought and idea. I've learned from each one. We have our Scrum Master course coming up at the end of the month. This is one of the first ones that's not available for Innovate Scholarship. We will hopefully be able to offer more scholarships later this year. That said, we're offering a discount code to be able to take this. This is an opportunity to, in this one, what are the other things you need to make a great team? What are the techniques? How do you go there? It ends with a opportunity to get your licensed Scrum Master certification from Scrum Inc. But even beyond that, I don't teach to paper. Certifications are cool. Knowledge and understanding of how to actually change the world of work and change lives is way more important. So out of this class, the primary goal is that the people that go through know how to build wonderful, fantastic teams that accelerate, that do it at a sustainable pace, that understand the human nature and are really comfortable with that fast pivot and guiding that from the process approach. So that's the goal. We have a discount code here for those that want to take it. This ends, the code ends on September 12th, or sorry, not September, June 12th. So be sure to take advantage of that. If you do it now, plus the early bird discount, that stacks. So it's like $800 to go through what's typically a $1,400 course. Thank you for your time, for being part of this, for everyone that's in the community in Birmingham, in Alabama, throughout the world. stay safe, understand, be patient and calm with yourself and with your teams. Experiment on how you can get better, and don't let things stay the same. Always find ways to make the world just a little bit better, and experiment and adapt. And that's the number one thing I want to leave with that. How do you build great teams? You work with great people, and you can drive that. So thank you, everyone. It looks like Michael did. So for as far as content, I will answer any additional questions or things like that. But that wraps for content. Please check us out. Look for future webinars. We've got an exciting one coming up soon around how do product owners weave great stories. I'm bringing in an acting coach and director friend of mine to help talk about that. So that ought to be very different and exciting. And we're always looking to help build community and build the world in any way that we can. So thank you for attending this. So I'm going to pivot back a little bit to questions. So Michael clarifies there may be bias or weight given to a certain idea or assumption based on a product owner's background. However, it's not the right solution for the end user. Okay, how does Scrum ensure that unintended bias doesn't make its way to end products? And that's, I love that question, by the way. And that's something I drive a lot in the product owner coaching and training that I do. Everything that you tell your team to go do is an assumption. It's an assumption that's going to create value. It's an assumption that someone's going to pay you for it. It's even an assumption that you're going to be able to build it. Bias, you can't get rid of bias. What you can do is mitigate bias. And so the way, so great product owners mitigate bias by first understanding the truth that they actually don't know the answer, that they're just guessing at it, and they acknowledge that. And so the way Scrum allows you to mitigate that is it shortens, it significantly shortens the amount of time to get feedback. So it says we're going to spend this sprint between 1 week and 1 month. If you're doing 1 month sprints, stop, do shorter sprints. Because what you want is more opportunities to test your assumptions. Put them out there. What is the smallest, quickest thing to validate your assumptions? Assumptions are okay. Bias, like I said, bias is part of the human nature. It's going to be something that's extremely difficult to overcome. So acknowledging that and shortening the window for risk. So for instance, I made an assumption in January that Birmingham wanted Scrum training and that we would be able to do that. I could have spent a lot of money, hired a big marketing firm and come in and pushed it. But I acknowledged I was making an assumption. So the smallest test I did was in January, because I could, I offered a class for my team, and we just invited a couple of people. Well, that couple of people within 2 weeks turned to over 40 people from complete word of mouth, advertising, absolutely nothing. Well, that validated the assumption that it was desirable. Then we needed to validate, is it feasible? I mean, we can train it, but can we keep it up? Then there's assumption on, is it viable? Is it something we can make money from in the long term? So finding the smallest tests to do that is important. And I'm getting a question. Oh, thank you. TJ is reminding me about Heidi's question on mental health. And I'm going back there trying to find that. So if you could either repost that or help me know which one that is so I answer it. I've clearly forgotten what that is. All right. So Heidi, if there is one okay, the business as usual. Oh, you're saying, okay, I thought I'd answer that one. All right, cool. Thank you for that. Other than that, that wraps for today. Looking forward to seeing y'all in additional webinars and events and opportunities in the future. Thank you everyone for attending. I really do appreciate everything and look forward to working with y'all again in the future. It's a wrap.